Hello, beautiful soul. My name is Tash Mitch, and I'm a chakra alchemist. And today I've got Tom Downing with me. I came across Tom's work over YouTube, and there was something that just kind of grabbed me about your journey and about the detox that you were doing to get in alignment with basically your soul's calling, is what I would say. So, welcome, Tom. It's an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Tell us a bit about your journey, how you got to the point where, you felt the need to go down this route of detoxing.
Yeah, so my life was kind of spiraling out of control slowly in all sort of corners, emotionally, physically, mentally. And I realized that I kind of needed to do something to change this. And I made quite a drastic decision to leave my life, and I moved from England out to Bali, and where I was introduced to raw foods, and I started using raw foods and following a certain way of using that to lighten up the body and affecting different parts of the body and the emotional and the physical. Yeah. And that was 2.5 years ago. So it's been going really well, and I'm now here. A lot better than I was. So
yeah, it sounds like you're living in paradise as well, right?
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful place. Yeah, massive changes, shifts all around. So it's been an absolute pleasure.
So what I was going to do actually is take the subject of detoxing on all levels, like a 360 degree, and take it through each of the energy centers. And basically, so when we start with the base chakra is very much about our physical bodies. And to detox is kind of like a preparation that needs to happen on a physical level, to get us to that phase of, being able to actually go through with it and do it and stick the course. Was there was there a path that you followed on a physical level when you came to detox?
Yeah, definitely. The teachings that I followed, I feel like the person who's delivered these teachings is pretty much setting up the world for this type of ascension process, and it starts at the physical. So the people that aren't ready to evolve and move forward, at least they have a system of getting themselves well, and they can kind of prepare their bodies for something they may not even know is going to happen. Kind of a preparation system. So this is kind of where I started. Where I revisited at the physical level. So that was the real calling card screaming at me saying, you need some work to do, and it's really hit the physical now. It's kind of like the last point of, staying around. If you want to continue in this life, you need to address your physical. So that was definitely the first port of call for me. And my body was delivering messages saying that this is, it was kind of screaming at me with certain implications in the body. I'd had quite a lot of time off work, and I was actually bedbound for about 6 months. So I'd really gone through the physical side of things, which was necessary of the process, but that was definitely the first port of call.
Yeah. And it sounds like you actually had, quite good motivation to do the detox, because a lot of times people can flutter in and out of it,
I was kind of lucky in a way because of my, I'm quite sensitive, and I have a fair bit of intuition about myself anyway. So I suppose I was lucky in the way that I was able to use that to drive me in that direction and not get too caught up in the medicine side of things. And I found it was really about taking responsibility at that point, and taking back your power.
Yeah. And because basically with the cleansing process, that sort of process of actually cleaning the body out, what has that been like for you?
I'd say the most difficult is the mental and the emotional side that you go through. The physical's tough, but it's like you can see and feel the physical, and you can kind of understand how to make it better. But whereas with the emotional stuff that's coming up, you can get really lost in it. Yeah. Because often when you get to that emotional cleansing, it's stuff coming up from really way back in childhood, and really cleansing the body to a full, to all the cells, to all the emotional side of things. So the first 9 months was the most difficult for me.
Yeah.
It was coming in waves of emotional turmoil, and it was quite a tough ride. But I had a fair bit of clearing to do, so.
Don't we all though? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't think you actually live in a human body and don't end up with some sort of clearing to do, basically.
No, that's
And
right.
this is naturally moving up to the sacral, which is the emotional and the feeling body.
Mm.
So by actually going through the physical detox, you then started immediately going through the emotional detox as well? Or were
Yeah.
you kind of hand in hand sort of thing?
They were kind of hand in hand.
Yeah.
I actually felt like the emotional and the mental were reflecting each other in certain ways. And so when I went through a lot of back issues, there was a lot of fear going on, and this was kind of like lower back. So even as far as the root chakra goes, you could connect it to that, and so there was many things that connected in with each other, and so yeah, they seemed to go hand in hand pretty much, and they would sort of mix between the two. So you'd never be overloaded with too much. You'd always have just enough to do with one, and then it would shift around. So yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
But I've noticed this in the past. I've pleaded to be out of physical pain and take it into the emotional body, and then it's come into the emotional body, and I've just pleaded to go back to the physical because the emotional turmoil of that was just too great.
Yeah.
And it was too much. So I think I think they sort of if it's an energy, I think they kind of like divide it up equally almost between the bodies, so that you can only do certain amounts at certain times, so that you can get through it, perhaps.
I find it interesting, because the mind has got such a big process in this, and it's very much about how we're framing things. It's very much about our languaging around things, because everything mirrors everything else, and the physical is replicated in the emotional and in the energetic. And I feel like they're replicated equally, but our mind will actually focus on one or the other, depending on where we are. So, so like basically, we can actually focus in and hone in on the emotional, for example, and depending on what we're, the language around that and what we're saying about the experience and what we're saying about ourselves within the experience, either intensifies it, because the one thing that I've actually really understood in my journey is that our words are powerful, right? And we are continuously casting spells with our words around us, but also on our own selves. Our own internal dialogue is almost like a magical spell that gets cast, depending on how loopy we are with our languaging. So it feels,
totally. Yeah, I feel like this whole thing is an undoing of all of that stuff. If you look, if say we touched on looking at karmically, that it's an undoing of that whole process, and it's kind of freeing ourselves and releasing all those shackles that we've put on ourselves. And I think it's our soul giving us messages, and the less we hear them, maybe they start off with feelings, and then they have to move down, perhaps, to become more, to alert us more. And the more stronger they get, the more intensified they become, the more serious they are to be looked at, perhaps, And I suppose they'll go through the bodies and give us these reflections of where we're at.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when we move this up to the solar plexus, which is very much about your personal identity, this is kind of like the home of the ego, and a lot of people have, they kind of like have a war against the egos. And for me personally, the ego is just a friend that wants to keep us comfortable and make sure that there's homeostasis and equilibrium. So if we're going too far left of center, then it's pulling us back, and what it's pulling us back to might not feel good, but it's pulling us back to what we know, because it's it's telling us that this is what it's used to. Basically, we've been in this environment or situation for years. Why would we want to change? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The ego always is continuously making you question where it is that you're going.
Absolutely.
And how is that?
I feel, well, for me, the solar plexus has been one of the most amplified areas in my life, for sure. I've dealt with it with Detox. It's very closely connected to both the nervous system, so it connects into the adrenal glands. So, and that's kind of like the root of emotional steroids anyway, but it's also then connected up into the head. So it's like in the detox side of things, it joins up here right in the solar plexus, and they call that the nerve ganglia.
Yeah.
And so you are connected to your emotions through your adrenal glands, but you're also connected to your emotions and your mind. So you're in this spot. And I noticed that this has such a massive effect on everything. And working on the adrenal glands from a detoxification point of view can really help to calm down the nervous system, but also working on the mind as well. And meditation can really calm that down, because it's almost like where the two join. And so, yeah, this has been a massive part for me. But the truest healing I had during this was when I honored myself. When I honored myself about 2 months ago, and it just really calmed down, because it was more important that I was honoring my soul, because the message was the fact that the nervous system was just out of control, because I was either seeing something that I didn't want to see, or I was resisting things about myself, or I was trying to push myself or steer myself in a direction which wasn't good for me. And so it was really causing all this kind of stuff going on. And I was very aware of ego. I'd been doing YouTube for a while, and that always brings up things, because you get to see yourself and judge yourself. So there was a lot of that going on. So I feel like you can work on this area in particularly, but intention is massive. So, the whole detoxification thing is great, because your intentions are on healing your body. So you're almost putting the spells and them things out there to attracting what you need, by saying, I'm willing to use these tools to help myself. And then perhaps you'll invite in the right information or healing that you need in another way. That's what I found very helpful.
There's so much to be said about
oh my God, there's so much to be said. Absolutely.
Basically, when we start to clear out, what fills that space is our soul's template, basically the template that we're here to live out. And that can, we can put so many layers of earthly crap onto that.
Oh yeah.
So once we start taking those layers off, we get that sort of sense. There's a relief that occurs with that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That finally we're hearing our own voice, the voice that's been pleading and sort of like knocking on the door from birth, like, let me in. Suddenly we're starting to hear it and listen to it. And there's such a, when you talk about honoring, the relief that comes from that.
Absolutely. I feel like this part is, this solar plexus part is such a massive part of moving forward, because we really just want to be ourselves and open up and be true to our hearts and just express ourselves truly. But the ego often steps in to protect us and says, no, this is vulnerable, this is unsafe, So there's that kind of learning to integrate that part of ourselves and be really brave and genuinely feel like we can open up and move forward. So that's really what I'm going through myself at the moment. And I still feel my solar plexus still there, but I'm working through it, and I'm understanding that sometimes, although fear can be scary, sometimes stepping into the fear can be a very good move forward,
And that's taking us straight up into the heart, because
the heart.
That's in all these directions that can seem really fearful to the solar plexus, because it's really uncomfortable, and we've got to be vulnerable and open ourselves up in a way that could be hurtful, or that's certainly how the ego tends to interpret some of the areas where the heart wants to take us.
There's something very important coming forward as you're saying that, about how sometimes we fast from ego, which can be really really bad for the soul, because we push ourselves too far. And I've noticed that this a lot in the detoxification game, and a lot of people are pushing themselves, but they're doing it from a place of force rather than a place of love. So they're putting feelings into their body which are destructive, really, where ultimately we're trying to purify and heal and make ourselves lighter and get the energy flowing. We're actually putting up a wall of energy block by being so harsh on ourselves and making us do these things which are pushing ourselves too far. So I'm a strong believer in trying to, only because I've been through it myself, being as kind as we can to ourselves during detoxification and listening to our body and our feelings.
Yeah.
And that takes us into the heart.
Yeah, very much. But it takes a while for some people, and including myself actually, to even hear the body. Because we live in a world that actually is continuously telling us that the body doesn't know what it's about, it doesn't know what it's doing. Do you know what I mean? So we've got to control it because it's got absolutely no idea. So then we start to not trust the body, and we start to look on the outside for all the information to inform us of what's going on. I mean, it's like when you think about how ludicrous it is, and I've done it, so it's kind of like I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, but how ludicrous it is to read an article by some random person that advises you about some random thing, and to the ego it sounds good, and then suddenly you're off and you're following this, and there's been no consultation with the body whatsoever as to whether this is for you, whether this is something you want to do. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So for me, this was a big part of is it okay to mention the person who I learned under?
Yeah.
So the guy's, he's called Dr. Morse, and he has a school in Florida, and it's a natural detoxification school, and he follows using natural foods, so all fruits, raw vegetables, and herbs for getting well. So they're strictly detoxification. So it is, it can be a little bit extreme, but it's about getting the body well. But what they do there is that they talk about our species and where we've come from, and the tools that we have and our senses and what we'd naturally go for before all of this other food came about and before we were able to cook our foods and things like that. And it starts to make a lot of sense. And I think as you start to actually eat those foods and you start to notice how you feel, I think there's some level of consciousness coming into the body at the same time, which is reconnecting us with the earth, perhaps, and with our divinity and where we truly came from. And I think that can help to get the body in connection with the mind or the ego and start to align things up. So that's definitely been the road for me. And the more I've practiced it, the more I've understood it through my own experience. And I think that's one of the most important things, is that we connect and learn to decide through our own body that this is right for us.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'll just quickly mention, just in case, Dr. Morse has many free videos on YouTube, which anyone can go and watch for free and get their own health back. So
fabulous.
in that way. So cool.
Fabulous. All right, so we're moving up to the throat, and we actually touched upon the throat previously with like the words and how important the words are, and how important it is to hear ourselves say certain things, because that's one of the things that I've actually started to come to terms with, even in this space where my role is very much consultation and sort of creating space for people to express. And it feels like that's where where you are as well. That sort of sense of actually hearing ourselves say certain things with conviction is really important,
Absolutely.
The words that we say.
Really do. Yeah. I think it's very easy for us to fall into pilot mode when we're speaking to people, say our parents sometimes, or something like that, because we're so used to speaking in a certain way that we can fall back. And I know that when I write things down, I'm very conscious, and when I'm talking to someone who's also quite conscious, there's the conversation's quite clear and careful of wording. But sometimes when we fall back into some of our old ways, then we go into autopilot, and then we're talking from a place which doesn't serve us, perhaps. And I think I've noticed that's happened to me a lot in the past, and even recently, just someone heard me talking with my mum and mentioned it, and I thought, wow, you have to be really on top of these things all the time.
Yeah, it's awareness, isn't it? Because there are words, for example, that we speak that are just completely low vibrational. And when I say that, I mean a word like exhausted, for example, a word like I'm dying, for example, which actually there's some people say that just as a by the by, soul destroying is one that whenever I hear that, I'm like, oh, do you know what I mean? I kind of it's really hard not to sort of respond to that. Speak these words and they become part of our cultural speak. And we don't
Absolutely.
realize that we're casting a spell with them, you know?
It's true. And it's also difficult when you hear someone talking to you like that, because for one, you know that it's a reflection. It's like, it's not just about me telling this person. So someone sent me a message today, and it was very, it wouldn't have been how I'd have spoken about things. And so I thought, I can't tell them what to do. How do I turn it around within myself, because I've attracted this in at some level. And, you know, it was just about saying, instead of this person replying to what they can't do, what could they do? And it was as simple as that, you know, and I didn't have to be confrontational, and it was just steering the direction in another way. And I suppose we get to see that even when we're not saying it ourselves, we see it in other people so much. And it's just as big a lesson to see how we can turn that around in ourselves, as well as noticing it in others.
Yeah. I struggle not to say stuff, actually, to be perfectly honest, and not in a condescending kind of judgmental way, but more just bringing the attention into what's actually been said. Because very often these kind of language patterns can be so subconscious that it's just kind of like, it's just a way of describing things. It's almost like saying baked beans, so kind of common. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The actual internal patterning that occurs when you speak certain words. It's a bit like the work of Dr. Emoto, and that sort of sense of basically the vibration of our words reconfigures us and reconfigures our energy. And so for me, yes, there's an element of, whoa, I've just attracted that. But there's also an element of, right, let's kind of bring our attention to what's occurring in the center. You know,
I think that's great. I think you know, the way of delivering that can be quite artistic if you're able to. Like I wouldn't like to get into an egoic mind battle with anyone about anything. You know, I'm aware that there's a certain stage that you go through where you can really detach from that, and so I'm still detaching from that. Let's put it that way. And so I'm careful on how I do it. But if someone's got the ability to go in there completely detached and genuinely factually point someone in the direction, I think that's great.
Yeah.
And that's definitely great, because we're all sort of moving through this together.
Absolutely.
And it's important that we're all supporting each other. Otherwise, someone's going to get left behind, and then perhaps we all will.
Absolutely. So when we move to the third eye, because there's so much about toxins and calcification of the third eye of the pineal gland. What's been the process for you with the detox and the third? This was
actually my first. This was the thing I was mostly drawn to originally. Before I even got into detoxification, I learned about fluoride and calcium, and how they calcify the pineal gland. And some of the old war stories back in the 1960s in Germany, in the war camps, how they used to put fluoride into the water so that they could control the prisoners by calcifying their pineal gland. So I was learning a little bit about this. So straight away, I started to remove all the toxins out of my life and go very organic and fluoride-free toothpaste, and not drinking the tap water, doing everything I could to work on that, because my main focus was, if I have my intuition, that's all I need to go forward in life. You know, I can just use my intuition. So if that's clear, I can see what I'm doing. So it's always been quite a focal point for me before I even got into that side of things. But naturally, the fruits and the alkalinity in the detoxification is a decalcifier. So not only does it work through all the glands and the liver and the kidneys, taking out all the calcifications, but it also would work on the pineal gland and removing the harder substances that block us from seeing internally, I suppose. So it's a massive one for me, the you know, working through that. And I'm a big fan of using sort of purple foods as well, to you know, to connect in with that vibration and that color. Absolutely, very much drawn to those.
So do you feel like the foods, the color of the foods basically relate to the chakras in that way?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like Yeah, it's hard to explain, but it would make total sense to me for them to be like that, because the natural foods that we have, especially the fruits, they're so vibrant. And if you feel like they're attuned to our bodies and to us, then you can see how by eating certain foods or being drawn to certain foods could affect certain areas of the body, and why they would, considering the colors of the chakras and the colors of the foods and the emotional content that comes with that.
Yeah.
For sure. So they do use, a lot of people will do that. And I've played with that in the past myself a little bit. So sort of going on one type for a week or so, and to see how that makes me feel. And I've had good results. And I think, again, intention is very strong with that. So it's got to make sense to us to try it. Absolutely. For sure.
Absolutely. So moving up to the crown, because in some ways the crown is the major reason for us kind of, getting to that detox level in the first place, is that sense of actually connecting to ourselves on a deeper level as an infinite being,
sure.
And really connecting to what our soul's journey is as well, and the soul being that kind of that greater template that runs the show. A lot of times we get so distracted with the physical, everyday human day to day, we lose access to that.
So I feel like as we start to clear the lower, more denser energies in our body, and we get to those higher levels, detoxification is less important from a physical point of view, and perhaps we're moving closer to actually the universal energy or the mind energy, where we can actually rearrange the molecules or rearrange our bodies and cleanse our bodies with our own co-creative minds, perhaps, as we work up. I feel as we remove the physical energy blockages, and at the same time as we're detoxing, we're removing the emotional and the mental go with that, because they all kind of leave at the same time through different, as we were speaking about earlier. The need to use detoxification can be less, but I do feel like our natural vibration moves closer towards the lighter foods, so the fruits, because our vibration is lighter, and I suppose using the law of attraction, we would be more accustomed to using those as we change. I know from myself that as I let go of more fear, I need less dense foods in my bodies as a kind of protection system almost, So as the mucus and everything sort of comes out, and the lymphatic system and everything moves, we may become more vulnerable, but then we get to see more of who we are. And I suppose when we can stand more strongly in that, then that's when we're a lot closer to our heart, and really receiving information and connecting in with our body at a deeper level. And so as we work up higher, we're actually accessing higher levels of information also, higher levels of consciousness, so we can see more, and we can understand why we needed to do that, why we needed to use the fruits, why we needed to use the herbs, why we needed to go back and do the emotional work, because there was lessons there that we hadn't learned, or perhaps, and so it seems to be, as we go through the process, we really do understand more each time we step up. And each time we step up, it's almost as if it's like, wow, I didn't know there was another level. And then it's almost like we're trusted with more information, because we're closer to our hearts, and our hearts are working towards the all, rather than individualized and working sort of egoically desires or something.
I always find that journey interesting, because there are people that to me, that journey represents the 6-point star, where you've got a triangle pointing upwards and a triangle pointing downwards. The triangle pointing downwards, to me, represent the first 3 chakras. The line across is obviously the heart, and then the triangles pointing upwards is the upper triangles. And to a large extent, you either get people who verse themselves first in the lower triangles, and then they access more of that information from the upper, more subtle energy levels, or you get it the other way, where people who are incredibly spiritual, but then the spirit isn't actually getting through to the body because so much needs to be cleared out. And for me, that was definitely where I'm hearing with you. It was very much from the physical up. for me, it's been a journey of the spiritual down. It's kind of like really versed in the upper realms, and then basically clearing and making way for this to come into the physical root itself in the base, basically.
Yeah, I think that pretty much everyone is being moved towards a wholeness in that way. Yeah. So that there used to be, we were very fragmented there. This person was very spiritual, this person was very grounded, and we all sort of knew about things individually from different aspects, and we were separate. And now it seems to be that everyone's starting to integrate everything, and we're all really starting to shift in one direction together. And I was actually a lot more open when I was younger. When I was very young, I knew a fair amount of things naturally, as a lot of people do. And I closed off to that from about the age of 12, as I started to go into teenager, and the emotional things all started to surface in my life. And then I had to start at the bottom again and then work my way back through that. And now coming back into some of those things that I knew about earlier, but I didn't understand what they meant. Now I understand a lot more, which is great. But yeah, definitely there's that movement through. And I think it's very important that we're aware of it, I suppose.
Yes.
That we're aware of that we can look at every part of ourselves, because it feels like the lower ones are the foundation, and not some people, like you said, some people who are a lot more spiritually gifted may not go down to the root areas because they feel that they're not so important perhaps, but it feels like they're the foundation, and so they might not be as they're a lot more dense, but they still are important to face. And I've certainly had to go back into that myself and really go into the emotional side of that as well.
Yeah, because that's one of the things with the grounding element. It's like we can I know that from personal experience, be so versed with the subtle realm and then struggle to bring it into the physical. So we've got these visions and just basically information that's sort of getting downloaded, but it never actually hits the ground. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Physical form or its physical match. When we talk about manifestation, it never finds its 3D mirror because we're so up in the upper realms, and that's been a real big, big learning for me, is to bring it down into and making way. That's the whole clearing, which is part of this conversation as well, is that bringing bringing this out to other people, the importance of making way and clearing in order for that to come through, basically.
Absolutely, yeah. And it goes back to how important it is that we're working on all levels, and I suppose it's just using all the tools we can, and and just finding the best things in each area. And it's great that there is people that are dedicated to the body, and there's people dedicated to the emotion, there's people dedicated to the mental. And it just seems to be a really nice movement of just how we can integrate that into one road. And I suppose that's partly what I'm trying to do, because I'm so interested in everything. I'm sort of going down each road and then bringing it back together and trying to map it out and see how it all works together and make sense of it, and then integrate it in.
Yeah.
So,
Tom, I'm really grateful for this conversation.
Oh no, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, it's been amazing.
Thank you so much. Great. If anybody wants to check out my my page, it's Inspired by Nature on Facebook and also on YouTube, and I do videos about things like this and having a bit of a chat.
Yeah, and I'm Tash, the Chakra Alchemist, and we'll be seeing you again soon.